Hey, good morning. I'm Paige Browning. It's Wednesday. This is Seattle Now. The Crocodile in Belltown has been home to album releases, reunion tours, music festivals, and even weddings. The venue is an essential part of Seattle's music scene, but hit some hard finance realities in the last few years. Now, it's got a new owner, an independent group that loves comedy as much as music. Today, we hear more about the Crocodile and the Seattle music scene from Seattle Times reporter Michael Rietmulder. But first, let's get you caught up. With blue skies overhead this week, December's flooding can feel like a distant past, but not for the flood's victims. Here's the good news. The federal government's now doled out $25 million so far for disaster aid, going straight to affected Washingtonians. Of that money, FEMA has distributed about $11 million so far, according to the Washington State Standard. The deadline to apply for that was last week. About half that money's going toward home repairs or housing people who are displaced. Transit nerds, today, King County Metro will lay out how it wants to expand bus service in the coming years. An ordinance passed 3 years ago requires Metro to gradually restore bus service that it reduced during the pandemic. Ridership has been steadily growing, with 30,000 more daily riders in 2025 than in 2023. Today's Regional Transit Committee begins at 3 p.m. And how about a data center in Seattle? Plans are in the works to possibly build a small-scale data center inside the same building as the Starbucks headquarters in SoDo. The Seattle Times reports it would not violate a recently passed one-year moratorium on large data centers in Seattle. But the owner of the building told the paper that several other tenants are interested in the space and they're exploring all of their options. We'll be back with more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. The Crocodile has seen every iteration of Seattle music and fashion in the last 35 years. The Belltown music venue, originally the Crocodile Cafe, has hosted local legends Nirvana, Death Cab for Cutie, Soundgarden, Sleater-Kinney, and so many more. It's opened and closed and reopened and moved and expanded over time. And then in 2021, the club announced its biggest project yet, the Crocodile Complex. They added a smaller music venue called Madame Lou's and a more comedy-focused space called the Hereafter. But those didn't make it long, with doors closing on the small venues last December. Now, a new owner has emerged and wants to revive the whole complex. Here to talk about the purchase and state of Seattle's music scene is Seattle Times music reporter and critic Michael Rietmulder. Hey, Michael. Thanks for coming on the show.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
First, I just want to know, what was the last show you saw at either Madame Lou's or the Hereafter, these smaller venues?
Oh, man. Testing my memory. It probably wasn't the last one I saw, but one of my favorite shows to see there was when Freakout Festival folks used to do a big spring blowout there, and they would have bands both upstairs in the main room and downstairs in Madame Lou's, kind of going back and forth between upstairs and downstairs. The whole place is just alive and flowing with all different types of music. So that was some of my favorite times to be in the space.
That's a great example of what you can do with a space when you have a complex, multiple venues. And as I mentioned, the Crocodile grew and grew over the years until finally it was this 3-part venue with varying sizes for shows. A pretty cool experience for a fan. But Madame Lou's and the Hereafter shut down in December. Why couldn't they survive?
Well, essentially, they made this big bet when the pandemic hit. Some of it was forced by a murky future at the old space. So they moved into this new location, expanded significantly, as you noted. And when shows returned from the pandemic, things had changed. Consumer habits changed. Notably, people weren't going to particularly the smaller shows as much as they had been in the past. Also, the folks that were going were seeing, generational shifts in drinking habits, which bar sales is a huge revenue generator for clubs of that size. So those two things combined really hit those downstairs rooms the hardest. Also, Madame Lou's, they were doing a lot of all ages shows, which is great. It's so important for just maintaining a healthy, replenishing music scene. But all ages shows, again, going back to bar sales, aren't as profitable for the
Yeah.
venues. So that was another factor. Now, the upstairs, the main room, the larger 750 cap main room at the Crocodile,
The one with literally a skeleton hanging from the
yes,
ceiling, right?
with the literal crocodile. According to management, that room was still profitable and was
Hmm.
doing just fine prior to the sale. But it was really the downstairs rooms that they were having a trouble with.
So now there's a new buyer. This investor group called the Comedy Tent. They're not local, but apparently they care about this storied venue. What do we know about them?
So the Comedy Tent is an umbrella group that's owned by talent manager Jimmy Smith and the former CEO of The Onion, among some of the
Yeah,
partners. This group runs Upright Citizens Brigade, which has two theaters in LA and New York,
a
a
big
film and TV,
comedy institution.
particularly kind of more alternative comedy, which one of the clubs that they own, a Pittsburgh comedy club and music venue called the Bottle Rocket Social Hall. So the owner and founder from the Pittsburgh club, Bottle Rocket, he's going to be really the one kind of boots on the ground here in Seattle, going through this transition and getting the downstairs spaces up and running again.
What went into their decision to buy the Crocodile, to buy into Seattle?
So they were looking to open other locations of Bottle Rocket in other cities. It just so happened that Chris Coppin, the founder of Bottle Rocket, had a friend who was doing the comedy booking at Hereafter here in Seattle. So Chris got word that his friend was laid off and heard about what was going on with the Crocodile. I think they just felt it was the right fit. The Crocodile already has a staff that's well versed in producing live music, and they can come in, especially with their comedy background, kind of add their two strengths together. One important aspect of this is that this new ownership group, while they are an umbrella company that has various entertainment holdings, this allows them to remain an independently owned venue. They are not getting gobbled up by one of the larger corporations like a Live Nation or an AEG. And that was something that was really important to the previous ownership group and both the management and staff, frankly. So the existing management team will remain in place. The staff, roughly 100 employees or so, will remain on board. In fact, the new group is looking at bringing some folks back who were laid off when Madame Lou's and Hereafter shut down. So that's a really important point.
And these two smaller venues in particular are now being redeveloped. I'm wondering what we're likely to see with what we know about the Comedy Tent. You know, Madame Lou's formerly had these more intimate shows. I saw like Charlotte Day Wilson there. The Hereafter, as we've noted, was more comedy centric. So is this purchase going to change what's offered, or what do we know? What's in the tea leaves?
Well, they're going to be announcing more information later this year, and I think some of it is to be determined. What they've said now is that they plan to bring sort of the best of what they were doing at Madame Lou's and Hereafter, and
Okay.
also combined with some of the things that they were doing at Bottle Rocket. You know, their mix is about 30% comedy, 30% music, and they also do a lot of independent original programming, things from a Mario Kart tournament, various lecture series, fake proms, and various parties and things like that. Some of these things that, had similar things have been happening in Madame Lou's, so it's not a huge stretch by any means.
I want to talk a little bit more about the Crocodile and its storied history. This is a venue with a lot of acclaim. In fact, it was named one of the 10 best clubs in America by Rolling Stone back in 2013. And it's just a beloved place in our local music community. From the Crocodile's own website, I love this line. We've been around long enough to see ripped jeans and flannels fall out of and back into fashion at least 4 times, and we have no plans to miss the 5th. So, Michael, with what this place is to Seattle, what does the upcoming reinvestment mean for fans?
Well, that remains to be seen. But, kind of to your point of what this has meant to Seattle over the years specifically, too, I think one thing that I really appreciate about the Crocodile's history, and I know it gets a lot of attention for being born in the grunge era, kind of right at that peak in
91.
1991.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of the grunge bands had actually kind of, graduated to larger rooms at that time. But I think in the 35 years since, one thing that I appreciate is how that space is shared by a number of groups, right? A lot of people associate it with grunge, but there was a period of time where it was very committed to Seattle hip hop and meant a lot. They were doing a ton of hip hop shows, and they still are for sure. But you can see different crowds and different demographics, different genres, all sort of sharing this same space and having their own kind of claim to it and outlook at it. And I think that's one of the things that's really beautiful about the place.
Yeah, I mean, you look through their history, they've had weddings, they've had hip hop festivals, they've had lots of rock and roll. The Crocodile sale comes after the announcements of a couple other new venues. The conglomerate Live Nation's opening a venue near T-Mobile Park, and the locally owned Vera Project is putting in a new venue in Georgetown. Are these indications Seattle's music scene is in a healthy place right now?
I look at these things as being in two different buckets, really. The Live Nation venue is a whole different beast. A 5,000 capacity room, they're going to be doing larger tours, a mix of artists that were maybe capable of headlining the Paramount Theater two nights, artists that are maybe on the verge of making the leap to arenas, but not quite there yet. Those types of shows, despite some of the cost increases in producing them, are by and large still doing well. I think we really have to treat them as two separate entities when we compare these larger venues to what's happening with some of the smaller clubs who are still struggling. It has not gotten easier. You mentioned the Vera Project. That new venue is exciting, and the reason it's possible is through charitable goodwill of a band that had recently acquired a warehouse space and wanted to do something community-driven with it. Also some philanthropy that Vera Project folks had gotten in. So it's really hard to draw any big sweeping conclusions about the health of the Seattle music scene when we're talking about really two different sides, because they're almost different worlds.
Do you think there's a good balance in our venue sizes right now, or are we short in one area, small, medium, large venues?
Well, there are always some holes to be filled, I suppose. This Live Nation venue is certainly trying to do that. Their main competitor is going to be WAMU Theater right down the street,
Right.
A venue that, shall we say, has its drawbacks. Also coming down the pike is another Live Nation venue, smaller than the one across the street from T-Mobile Park, that will be reaching further down the ladder, size-wise, also kind of filling a niche. I don't know where their capacity is at this point. Details are still coming together. It's in a new development building, but we're seeing some of those holes being filled.
Before we let you go, which venue is the best place to see a show? I know that's hard to answer, but I'm curious, who is doing it right, especially in this middle size or even small size? What's a good model for Seattle?
One thing I guess to maybe spin it slightly differently, I would say one venue that I maybe hold a soft spot for, or I think sort of sets themselves out a little bit. After I get done praising the Crocodile for having it be this shared space with many different groups and genres, I think you look over in Ballard and see the Tractor Tavern, which is really over the years been this home base for a specific sound, that That's Americana and alt country, where it kind of feels like a hub for a particular
That's true. You know
group
what
of
to
music
expect.
fans.
You know what you're going to get when you go there, or at least the family of music that you're going to get.
For sure. Now, I don't want to completely reduce it because they do other shows as well, but that is their bread and butter. The same could be said for Nectar Lounge in Fremont. They do a lot of jam rock scene, global music, some electronic as well. And the kind of flavors that they're mixing with over there. And I think it becomes more of a hub for, some like-minded fans, which I think is cool and sets them apart.
Michael Rietmulder is the Seattle Times music reporter and critic. Michael, thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now. Not just today, but all the times you have in the past. We so appreciate your listenership and hearing from you. If you could take a minute for us tonight, we're not asking for much. No crocodile tears need to be shed. But if you could take a moment to rate and review the show in your podcast app or text this episode to a friend, that would mean a lot. Today's episode was produced by Vaughn Jones, who has played at the Crocodile Complex. It was edited by Andy Hurst. Our production team also includes Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers, Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, and Patricia Murphy. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Paige Browning. Talk to you tonight for Evening Headlines.